do or do not want to talk about?
Oh, no, I'm
Yeah.
pretty open book. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, let's jump into it.
Great.
I'm going to take a deep breath and then we'll get going. All right. Welcome to Peak Mind. I'm your host, Michael Trainer, and I am here today with John Wineland. John, it's an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, I wanted to first off acknowledge that I've been knowing of your work for some time, but the book that you released from the core has been something I've gone back to and revisited more than most books, and I think in these very tumultuous times, I think there's solace that I have found in going back and listening to the book time and time again.
Thanks, man.
And I know that you do a lot of work around the masculine,
Yeah.
and I know you distinguish that between sort of men and women, so to speak. But could you start by just talking about your notion of polarity as it relates to the masculine and the feminine?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a lot of it can be a very charged topic, and normally it's only charged when people assign gender.
Hmm.
um, and so I've been a big part of my work is to try to tease apart these kind of masculine and feminine qualities that all humans have, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of sexual preference, regardless of gender identity. We all have a part of us that is that, let's just call it, lives in stillness, prefers deep, spacious, quiet, is tethered to or has at least an understanding of consciousness, right? That the unchanging sort of stillness in the universe, right? And and nature reflects this as well, right? When you look at the universal makeup, we're basically the universe is basically made up of emptiness and energy. That's it, right? And
Yeah.
so right down to the atom, right down to the atom. And so the masculine in all of us is the part of us that relates to, identifies with, feels at home in that spacious, grounded, expansive consciousness. Right? We all have that in us. We all have consciousness as part of our makeup as humans, right? We're aware that we're alive and having this moment. We're aware that, that energy is moving around us. We're aware that we're having a conversation. We're aware. And so that awareness is, the essence of our masculine. So everybody has a masculine essence, that part of us that is unchanging, right? The way my teacher used to describe it is the part of you that is the same now as it was, at 4, right? And the part of you that's the same, as, I would like to say even before you were born, the you before you were born. So that masculine essence, we all have it, men, women. And then the feminine in us is that in us which is really identified with energy, all forms of energy, right? Everything from pleasure to emotion to desire. I mean, all of those things to just feeling life's pulse, right? And so those of us that are more at home in the pulse of life, in the movement of life, in the expression of life, we relate more to, that's the feminine, right? So and again, all natural phenomena have a masculine and a feminine essence. I grew up as a Buddhist, and the Buddhists say that the mystic law, God, they would call it God, but the mystic law of the universe has both a latent, meaning a kind of a non-manifest aspect, and then a manifest aspect, right? And so that is an example of a spiritual definition of the masculine and the feminine. And so polarity is when one of us, if we're going to just make that argument, is when one of us decides, I'm going to amplify my masculine essence, my depth, my grounded consciousness, my spaciousness, my stillness. I'm going to ground in that, and I'm going to release, my attachment to energy And then the other one of us does the opposite. So I'm gonna amplify the energy, the desire, the expression, the incarnation of divine love. I'm gonna ground in that. I'm gonna express that. And when two people, however they identify sexually, do that, they create this arc of energy that is known as sexual polarity. And so, it's like if you think of, two magnets, right? So the stronger the pole of each magnet, like literally the more turned up each individual magnet is, the stronger that arc of attraction between the magnets, right? So in good masculine work and in good feminine work, at least in this framework, the more your magnet is turned up, the more you are actually attracting the opposite pole. And that's, again, that is gender neutral.
Yeah. And so for those listening, in the context of both relating, I would say, to ourselves, but also relating to that which we seek to attract. In this context, let's say, that's a masculine and feminine sexual essence, regardless of gender.
Yeah.
It seems like conflict arises or energy dissipates when someone really isn't in their essence, isn't in there, for lack of better term. You talk a lot in the book about depth, right? Isn't in their core, and or both are kind of replicating the same polarity. Like they're not bringing about that balancing, so to speak. Each is operating on the same side of the spectrum.
Yeah, they're more like neutralized magnets.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we, because obviously we live in a culture that's rapidly changing. Archetypes are changing. As you talk about in the book, and I think we can all acknowledge, thankfully there's the rise of the feminine and the feminine in the workplace, etc. is all happening in many places. However, oftentimes, and I can say this speaking to a lot of my female friends who are badasses, powerful women taking care of business, they also still want something, at least many, that is sort of core masculine that they're not getting in their life, right? Like there's a feminizing oftentimes, if for lack of a better term. I was just with two Swedish women, and they were like, in Sweden now it's like a man won't even ever approach you. It's actually totally up to the women now, and there's a sort of a feminizing of that polarity, and the women are embodying more of the traditional masculine role, and so I think there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, just a lot of confusion, right? And good people still wanting to do the right thing. I can speak from personal experience. I definitely identify as a masculine in my essence, but I'm also, for lack of a better term, an empath, highly sensitive person. Like I have a deeply feminine aspect, and so I definitely don't want to. I don't want to step on any toes of the feminine. We're obviously in the context of the Me Too kind of generation, and so it's hard to know how to operate, right? Where it's like many of the women I meet are like, actually, I want a man to be a man and step into his power, and yet at the same time, there's this heightened sensitivity around like, oh, even if I don't do anything wrong, maybe there's a trigger evoked, and then there's just like a lot of, I think, fear. So, how do you see in this kind of very amorphously evolving landscape, we come into that place of depth of who we truly are, and kind of navigate gracefully as best we can these evolving dynamics and archetypes?
Yeah. I mean, well, I read a lot about this in the book, and in my second book, which is called The Art of Sacred Intimacy, I write a ton about this. So I think we need to zoom out, for just a moment here for your listeners, and say that a lot of the changes that have happened over the last 50 years are very healthy, right? For example, men becoming more emotionally available, men becoming more intuitive, more empathic, more compassionate, less hard driving, right? All very good in human development, right? and the opposite too, like women, taking the bull by the horns and claiming their place in the world and pushing forward their missions and driving their own success. Also very healthy. The problem is that when that those aspects of our masculine and feminine don't translate into a sexually polarized relationship, right? So we should be able to, once we learn, for example, I've worked with a lot of women. I ran a women's program for many years. I have a lot of women in my co-ed programs. And when a lot of women have that same complaint that you're just talking about, like I'm kicking ass all day long, I'm leading all day long. I don't want to have to lead my relationship all the time too. Some of the time, right? But not all the time. And so the more powerful a woman is in her, let's say, professional life, what I've seen is the more she needs a deeper masculine presence in her life to take charge of the connection, to deepen the connection, right? Not to lead her in her life or tell her what to do, or she's doing that just fine, but to have a real depth of masculine presence and core stillness, you would call it, right? To really, she needs a deep man. The more she's leading in her life, the deeper the man she needs. This is what I've seen and heard from hundreds, if not thousands, of women. And and you can make the opposite argument, just to say, the more on purpose a man is, right? And he has a masculine essence, right? The more in his mission, on purpose, the more energetic a feminine partner he needs to sort of nourish and balance him. And so what we're working with now is what we could call an agility, an energetic agility, meaning teaching, I spend a lot of time teaching people like how to go from, very deeply still, rooted, present, sort of mountain kind of energy, and then into flow, right? Or into feeling, right? And ultimately what we're looking for is we're not looking for, here's the other distinction, only in sexual moments or relational moments where we want maximum polarity, we're talking about a very small amount of time per week, right? This framework, this skill set is for the time that you want to create that deep juice, that really deep energetic arc. It's not the rest of the time when you're in the office or taking the kids to school or, or going to church or whatever you're doing. You're not going to, you maintain a certain level of that, openness and flow, but you amplify it in the moments of energy, of relational and sexual expression. So to learn that skill, to be able to go from, for women, for example, to be able to go from hard driving, holding a lot, leading a lot, to then going home and being fully expressed as a feminine being, as desire, as yearning, as pleasure, right? That takes an energetic agility that a lot of women are really working hard to learn. And on the opposite side, it takes men, for men to go from being, same kind of thing. So now you've got, we're both, men and women are both more masculine and more feminine, so we're more the same. We're more the same, which is very healthy and great, except in the bedroom, right?
Yeah,
Except in the bedroom. And so this is what people are now, in the last few years, are waking up to realize, like, oh yeah, it's great, we're more the same, that men and women are like getting more equal in the way of being, but we've lost a certain juice in our relational experience, and that juice is incredibly important and nourishing to make relationships magic, right? So that's what we're navigating. I hope that was clear. I went on a long diatribe.
No. I think it's super clear. It's really helpful because I think, at least in my listening, what you're talking about is we are in many ways moving more towards, for lack of a better term, equanimity in regards to our relating. The challenge is there are certain essential aspects that thrive in polarity, primarily of which is that sexual chemistry, for lack of a better term. And what I like in the distinction you drew, which I hadn't somehow consciously thought about, is that it's not necessarily all the time, right? It's not like you've got to be in your I used to think about like active and passive context
Yeah.
of active and passive masculine, active and passive feminine. It's not like you have to be in one all the time. It's actually creating a context, a container for that charge, for example, as I'm understanding it, to thrive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know a lot of the work that you do is actually around this notion of depth and that for lack of a better term, encouraging that awareness, right? The breath of like breathing into where you are, breathing into what is being called for in the environment or in your partner.
Yeah.
How does one train themselves in your worldview to know when that moment is wanting to emerge, for lack of a better?
Yeah.
How do we
Yeah.
train ourselves in the listening to know the music that wants to sing, so to speak?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great question, because that's ultimately the goal, right? And as I say a lot in my book, the goal is integration of both our awareness and our sensitivity. You know, our masculine, our awareness, our capacity to be aware, and our capacity to be incredibly sensitive to the environment. And so there are different practices and different modalities. Many of them I teach, in my programs, but there are many other places to learn these, that both expand any human, man or woman or other, any human's capacity to be more sensitive both to our own emotional experience and the experience of the environment and the experience of others, right? Just we can turn our body on to feel more, right? To feel more. And then we can also turn our body on to deepen into the moment and be in that still space of listening, right? So both are required. That integration in all humans is required for wholeness, for a healthy wholeness, right? And quite honestly, very few have it.
Yeah.
Very few have it. And so, especially men. Women are ahead of us. Women are way ahead of us because they've been working in the realm of we've been warring, accumulating, dominating for 99.9% of our human history. Men have, right? With little pockets of in spaces of wisdom cultures where they really work on this. But in the Western world, we're way behind. So women are ahead of us in this capacity to feel more. So all this going to your question, right? The more we develop our capacity to both be tethered to conscious awareness, to let's call it the field of awareness. Rupert Spira would call it the field of awareness, through which our lives are happening. Like every moment is emerging out of a field of awareness so we're aware life is happening. This moment is happening. That field of awareness is the core masculine essence, right? So the more we're aware, the more we're grounded in that infinite space of awareness, and the more sensitive we will start to receive cues of, oh, her heart is closed, or oh, he's malnourished, or oh, she has a resentment that needs to be cleared, or oh, my children are sad, or oh, my company needs this. Like we're just more ninja, for lack of a better term, right? If you can imagine a ninja like feeling the environment, well, they fucking train their whole lives to do that.
Totally.
And we don't. We're watching our phones, right? We're watching our, So we literally have to turn up our martial, meditative, yogic capacities to feel more and then be rooted in awareness. So when you're rooted in awareness and you're more sensitive, you're just going to feel what's off, like what's not open, what's not loving, what's not conscious, what's bound, right? And then I'll give you a concrete example.
Sure.
So my girlfriend and I were going to this hike we love here in Sedona yesterday afternoon, and I could feel she was just kind of agitated, and I could feel there was something brewing. And I could feel it because I trained in this, and I'm very sensitive to her emotional body. And I'm like, baby, what's going on? Like, I know something seems, and she was like, no, it's nothing big. She didn't want to bring up a resentment, and I was like, no, there's something there. Like, let's just unpack it. Like, we got a little drive, like, just tell me what's going on. And then she proceeded to tell me, like, something that had been irking her about something that I did or had done a couple of times. And she just like unpacked it. And I listened and I reflected and I owned where she was right. And I did all the things I try to do in my book. I try to talk. I was like, okay, where is she right? I owned that. I didn't get defensive. I didn't make her wrong. I just kind of listened and let it unpack. And then by the time we got to the hike, it was all very clear, and she was very grateful that I gave space for her to share her truth. And, I knew that was happening because I'd been doing the work for 15 years to feel that it was happening. And that's a really good example of how this kind of new paradigm of, I would call it leadership, but it could be in a man or a woman or anybody, of really feeling each other and being aware of what will bring the moment, what will bring the connection back to a deeper space of love.
I think that was incredibly beautifully articulated, and I like that you gave an example. And what it evokes for me, and I don't know how resonant this will be with those listening, but I imagine for some it will. The question then comes for me, to what degree is there a presence, and so in that feelingness, right? So as a deeply feeling man, I will say that what's interesting is I notice a lot of people, so you actually evoked in your partner, and I'm sure there's a myriad of dynamics in which she evokes, et cetera, but
Yeah.
you evoked a context of conversation in which that sort of the unspoken was brought to words, and it was released, and that sort of tension dissipated.
Yeah.
There's another context in which we enter into a place. I haven't talked about this publicly, but I have a new word that I've discovered, which is what I would call trauma bombing. And I have had an experience lately where I'm sitting with a woman, and without context, she will start to share her deepest traumas. Like I was just with a woman the other day, and she was like, without, I'm not betraying any confidence because no one knows who she is, but she was talking about, her dad was killed by the mafia and being raped and drugged, and I was like, and I don't even know this woman very well, and I was
Right.
just like, wow, okay, so, and for me, what then comes up is, so I have a tendency in the past of being sort of a martyr and just like, okay, give me all your shit and I'll take it.
Yeah.
And what I've realized is in my life, I'm actually trying to develop healthy boundaries where it's like, and by the way, not to dismiss someone or just cut them off, but, where I'm like, wow, and I don't know the proper way to handle this, but what I've been exploring is I really, feel you, I deeply empathize, and also, I'm a highly sensitive person, so like I don't know what to do with all this, but I want to hold space for you, so to speak. And at the same time, like, wow, why am I attracting all these, super intense, out of context, like, like dumpings, for lack of a better term, right? So,
Yeah.
How does one also, and how does one also effectively, for lack of a better term, hold a boundary so that they can stay? Because the long-term consequence of that is, in some ways, while there is an awareness, it feels like that awareness gets filled with other people's crap, for lack of a better term. So
what you just described was
Yeah, please.
her lack of feeling and sensitivity and awareness.
yes,
Right. So there wasn't, she was more in the pattern, God bless her, right? She was more in the pattern of just like dumping, her, life trauma, rather than feeling, is this the moment for that? Can
Right.
this person handle that? Has he consented to that?
right,
And sometimes sometimes setting a boundary just sounds like, hey, I know it sounds like you went through a lot, and I'm not available you can even say I did not consent to be part of this, this part of the conversation, right? I'm not open to receiving your life's trauma. We don't know each other well enough,
right.
which takes balls.
Yes, it does.
But at the same time, you're kind of serving her.
Yeah,
In that moment, you're like saying, hey, like, I understand you want to share everything with me, and I think that's beautiful. And this is a little too much information for me right now. Maybe when we get to know each other better in a different context, you know, I can hear this. But right now I can feel my nervous system kind of getting jangled. And I just want to, you know, I just want to ask if we could table this part of our conversation for our second or third or fourth date, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's
And then how she
beautifully said.
responds, just for the little dating tip for everybody, when you set a boundary and you set it kindly and you set it as artfully as possible, how she responds will tell you a lot about who she is as a prospective partner, or him. You know, I mean, this is for everybody, right? So that's how I would have done it. But you're pointing to our general lack of awareness. So if someone is incredibly feminine, then what she will want to do is just be in expression a lot, right? That's just so feminine men too. Like I actually have a very strong feminine. I'm very expressive, but so the more feminine someone is, the more expression is their way of living, way of being, their priority, what they want to be fully expressed. If they lack a proper masculine, and when I say a proper masculine, I'm not talking about the ability to kick ass and drive and set goals and da-da-da-da. I'm talking about the awareness piece. So there are different aspects of the masculine. The feminine has taken on many, right? And feminism kind of promoted this, like go into the corporate world, earn as much, become just as potent as men are. And again, that's very healthy, but that's only one, that's not actually the highest form of masculinity. The highest form of masculinity is the feeling awareness that we're talking about. And so to be able to embody consciousness is the deepest masculine practice, right? To be able to embody love is the deepest feminine practice for all of us, right? So what we're seeing in women just as much, and I know this because I coach a lot of women, is they haven't cultivated, let's say, the higher form of masculine practice. So they're missing awareness of how their emotionality sometimes, or how their expression, and of course men have the same problem too sometimes, right? How it impacts a moment. Right? That's a big thing. So what you've seen also in a lot of men is they'll just start dumping their wound as well without being aware of, is this opening the space? Is this the proper time and context for this space? So this what I would call sacred masculine practice to cultivate a feeling awareness is not just a men problem. It's a problem with all humans, and very few have done the work to cultivate it.
Yeah, you spoke about this in the book, wherein, a woman will. You talk about a man. My recollection is coming home from work and wanting to dump. And there's a very different distinction between just dumping and saying, I can't remember the exact words you used, but saying, honey, could you, sort of hold, for lack of a better term, hold space for me. I need a few minutes. Exactly.
Yeah.
I need a few minutes to sort of like let go of the day, and then I can, sort of step into being fully present. And what it evokes for me is just a greater courage in, the word is overused these days, but sort of inauthentic, I think, communicating in regards to like what's up for you and alive for you, which I think we also move through these transitions, right? Like you talk about, for example, the workplace and obviously greater equality in the workplace, but like oftentimes people are taking their workplace persona and there isn't really a healthy divide between I walk through the door and then I shift into a different aspect or archetype. It's like we're bringing these parts of our day into the next, and that context may actually call for a different aspect of who we are, a different attunement, a different listening. And
Attunement.
attunement, exactly. And that's actually that metaphorically. So I've been getting my ass kicked by writing my first book, and it's all about sort of the music of relationship, not necessarily romantic relationship, but what is the song that wants to live in the space between two people. So it's very much about this notion of attunement and how we become instruments for that song.
Yeah.
And I feel like in a lot of what we see in culture, it's like people are just coming in blasting their song. It's like, I am Metallica and I'm just good, as
Yeah.
opposed to
Yeah.
like in a symphony realizing, hey, wow, there's a lot of beauty in the silence, between the notes. And when is it time for that instrument to come in most beautifully and eloquently?
Yeah.
And and so there's a lot. I feel like there's a lot of declaring or a lot of soloing without a
Yeah.
lot of necessarily symphonic sort of resonance, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and you talk about some of the tools that I would call attunement tools. For example, I think you talked about like the four core needs of men, and I know for me at least, nature is one of my great attuners. Going into, you and I were talking before we started about the Eastern Sierra, which is one of my favorite places to get back in tune. But can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit about, for the masculine, and if you want to talk about the feminine as well, that'd be beautiful. But how do we come back into a sense of attunement or back into a sense of center in ourselves so that we can actually have a greater awareness around what's called for in the moment?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would use a different term for what you're describing, which was nourishment, right? And so when we're empty, when we're depleted, when we're burdened, exhausted, overworked, right? It's very hard for us to tune into the environment or others or our loves. But when we're nourished, we have a lot more capacity to feel, and then to be generous in our response to what other people need. So nourishment for the masculine, I think I outlined four particular ways. One is time alone with no demand, right? The masculine in all of us needs to have time with no demand, which is not scrolling social media. It's like just no demand, looking at the ocean. The ocean doesn't want anything from you, and yet she's filling you with her energy, right? Her negative ions, her, you know what I mean? All of her beauty, right? Time with no demand, especially in nature, right, is the other one. Time with other men or masculine beings, right? Preferably in nature with no demand. So those things literally uptake our dopamine, uptake our testosterone, literally replenish our tanks, refill our tanks. The fourth one is your feminine partner is a form of nourishment that's always available as well, and there's certain ways to work with that. And so that nourishment allows for greater attunement, if we're paying attention, if we've cultivated we haven't talked about breath yet on this, but I just want to make a
I'd love
plug,
to.
right?
Yeah.
Because the single most important thing that any human can do to become more aware, to still their nervous system, to turn on their feeling body is breathe. Is breathe deeply. I mean, we're always breathing, but to consciously expand your breath into your lower abdomen, into your heart area, and really just deepen and slow the breath. If that's all that anybody gets from this podcast is deepen and slow the breath so that you can be more ninja-like, that's great. So
Could you actually, John? Because and the reason I love that you're bringing this up, I actually felt called to earlier this week, based in part on your book, which I want to thank you for, and also just had an insight in my breathwork class that I was going to do a breathwork certification. So I actually just started my own sort of deep breathwork training, but I would love it. I've done breath work with Wim Hof and Laird Hamilton, a variety of others. I'd love it if you actually are open to it. Just even if it's a very basic prompt, but if you could share a breath exercise, and it can be very brief, but that people could use to tap back into that nourishment or that attunement.
Yeah, great. And this is super easy, and it really only takes 2 or 3 minutes to totally change your neurology, your brain chemistry, to totally ground your body, right? Especially important, in heightened forms of stress. So if we imagine, let me just set it up. You can imagine your pelvic bowl, right, your lower diaphragm, as the bottom of a balloon. And when you fill up a balloon, it expands in all directions, right? So your diaphragm literally expands in all directions. And so as you expand that balloon forward to the sides of your hips to just under your sacrum, and then you gently pull that balloon back up. So, and you can start slow, and then just gently pull that balloon back up, and then get a little faster and a little deeper. So let's just do this for a minute and just keep doing that and see if you can both deepen the breaths and make them a little bit more, just automatic, so there's no pause between the inhale and the exhale. And just really imagine that balloon, that lower diaphragm, is extending down through your genitals, down, literally touching the earth. And then as you inhale up, you pull that earth energy. As you exhale up, you pull that earth energy up from the earth. And so it becomes a very grounding practice of expanding deep breaths down into the earth, kissing the earth, and then exhale, pull that diaphragm up and pull that earth energy up into your lower abdomen, into your genitals. Press down through your hips, down through your knees, down through your feet. Just really feel the contact with the earth as you do this. Let's just do 5 more rounds of that. Deep and full. And then exhale all the way out. Hold it. Let everything get very still. No thought. And then in 3, 2, 1, big inhale in. Feel your lower abdomen like a medicine ball, very heavy. And then in 3, 2, 1, exhale. And just before you come back online, notice where you feel your awareness in your body. And most of the time doing this just for a couple minutes, you'll actually feel more space in your lower abdomen. You'll feel your center of awareness won't be your thoughts so much as your lower belly. Mm-hmm. And that is a very fast way, the lower belly, either in a woman, her womb, lower abdomen is her womb. In the man, it's your dantian, your power center. And so just taking a couple minutes to breathe into that takes us from living here into living here.
What a beautiful state shift. Is that something that you invite, for example, we talked, for example, about demarcating space or creating these moments of for lack of a better term, I would call it sort of the moreness, the more that wants to live, that sort of possibility and potential, that charge, that polarity. Do you ever invite someone to tap into their breath, or is there a gracious way to do that? Obviously, with a partner, you have a context, but it seems like it may be a little too, because sometimes I think, like you said, like just as a conversation can sometimes be a little too intimate too quickly. Perhaps breath could be, if not gracefully done, too intimate too quickly. And at the same time, it seems like such a powerful state shifter from which to evoke a new tenor of conversation.
Yeah. I think there are contexts where it's appropriate, but I would always encourage us to start with our own practice. And especially for those watching, if you just did that 2 or 3 times a day, your entire nervous system would shift. If you do this if you do just deep pelvic, all I'm doing is deep pelvic floor breathing with a little bit of a grounding awareness. But if you want to really get high, do it for 5 minutes at a very rapid and deep pace, and oh my God, you'll feel so good. And and so it really is they're proving this now, that breath does all kinds of things to our parasympathetic nervous system, to our brain chemistry. Like, we are literally up-leveling our state in very measurable neurochemical ways very quickly. The problem is that most of us don't commit to a consistent, all day long returning to our deepest breaths. But once we've done something like that, for example, just for a few weeks, it starts to become a normal approach in our body just normalizes it, and we just breathe deeper all the time. Then if you're in, let's say you're on a date, so let's say you're on a date, right? And the person you're with is talking very fast, or is very animated, or you know what I mean? Or very just kind of not fully grounded. Then this is especially important for the masculine partners, right? If you want to deepen the moment, deepen your breath, and the moment will follow. If you want to deepen the moment, all you have to do is you can be covert, just deeper, just nice, just expand a little bit, lower your inhale, and your partner will, not because of mirror neurons and just because of the way that we are relationally, will start to catch on. Eventually, it might take a couple minutes or 3 minutes, but eventually it will just deepen the space you're in. So I guess the quote from that is, deepen your breath, and then the moment you're in will deepen. And that's true in a relational moment, a sexual moment, when you're out alone in nature, with somebody who's having a trauma experience. All of that is very true.
Yeah, you spoke about in the book a moment where, if I'm recalling correctly, you were on actually a date, and you could kind of feel the date moving into the mundane. That was the sort of way I heard it. Mm-hmm. And at least my recollection was you actually paused it and you said, wait, you sort of stopped her in the mundane, kind of the direction of the downward spiral, and you're like, I want to feel you. And you stepped into that conscious kind of moment, and that led to, as I understood it, a greater depth. Can you talk a little bit about that desire of the masculine and the feminine, that impetus or desire for depth, and how when we can consciously feel ourselves moving more into the frenetic fray or out of presence, how we can arrest those moments and encourage that greater depth?
Yeah, well, I think all humans, regardless of how we identify, right? Like we're craving deeper love.
Yes.
We're craving a deeper love connection with our friends. We're craving a deeper love connection with our lovers, with our children, right? Even with nature, right? With the earth itself, we're craving it. And the key component to that is to slow down. And so you slow your speech. Take a breath in between. Slow your speech. Plant your feet a little more firmly. There's literally, your body is an instrument for this connection. And when people actually start to learn how to use their body in a moment to instantly shift a connection, like in the story you were just talking about, it's fucking revelatory. It really is. You're like, oh shit, like I didn't know I actually had that much agency.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I could take a moment just by softening my eyes, by slowing my breath, by talking a little bit slower. I could deepen a moment or an experience with somebody else. So I think what I said in that date, and I don't recommend this, was as she was talking and I just looked at her eyes and I said, just stop talking for a minute. And then she was kind of shocked, and I said, I want to feel you. And then she stopped, and we breathed together and looked at each other and smiled and had a beautiful time, right? So I don't recommend that at home, because I could have gotten slapped. But I think we all have this untapped agency that is our body. And when we can learn to, again, bring awareness to let's call it the speed of our nervous system, we instantly have capacity to shift the depth of a conversation, the depth of a connection, the depth of our own feeling body, the depth of our sexual experience. It's fucking magic, really. Mm-hmm. And when I learned this from my teacher 15 years ago, it basically changed the whole direction of my life. And I think most people that come to my work, they stay because they have that recognition, like, oh, this is a skill set that nobody teaches us when we're young, unless we grew up, in martial artists, with martial artists or yogis or someone really deeply attuned to this. And this is a skill set that as I deepen and as I expand, everything in my life will start to follow suit. And that's why I still am very much in the work and very much teaching this.
Yeah, the notion of depth, or the notion of actually being committed to this work, seemingly changes all aspects around you. Not just your relating with, for example, your partner, but but also your relationship with the world. And there's a lot of talk now about different modalities around the correlation between your beingness and what you create in the world, right? Like, I think we've moved out of an antiquated notion of like doing equal, once I accumulate or acquire, I'll be happy, right? Like once I have the house or the certain amount of money, then
Can't tell you how many people I coach that are very rich and still very unsatisfied. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So this is the sort of the secret sauce, I feel like, because if we're, for lack of a better term, I just was re-listening also to a conversation with Bill Perkins, who's another guy down in Austin that wrote a book called Die With Zero. But what I liked about what he talks about is he's talking about optimizing for fulfillment, right? Which I think is another conversation which is sort of implicit. I think all of us, what we're deeply yearn for is fulfillment in love, in how we show up in the world, in what we're actually looking to create out of this life. But many of us are trying to climb the very wrong ladder to get there, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And it feels to me like some of the tools that you're bringing to bear, a lot of these are ancient practices that you've kind of brought into a modern awareness, as well as kind of your own take, if you will, on these polarities and how we can be in the dance in a beautiful way. But to me, and you talk a little bit about this in the book, but that dance around you unfolds in very different ways, not just in the context of, say, a partner, but in the context of how the world sort of orients around you. Can you talk a little bit about that, like how the depth of our embodiment correlates to the world outside of us?
Yeah, I mean that was also a revelation for me, because I came into this work with my teacher, a man named David Data, I should mention, right, who, very well known, and I worked with him for 15 years. So the revelation that I received is when I heard him say, like, everything changes when you are deeply resonant with the core aspects of your being. The core aspects of your being, love and consciousness, right? And when we are more tapped into, basically what that means is we just remember through our bodies more that we are love and consciousness. That's all it means. It's just, we just remember more times a day. Nobody's there all the time, unless you're, maybe, the Dalai Lama or somebody, and I'm sure he has his bad days. But the more we remember that we are love and consciousness, the more the world feels that, because there are so few that actually are committed and embodying that. And I might remember that 10% of the day, and that's up from 3%, 15 years ago, right? So I'm just like making very incremental, but even that changes my relationship to it changes how much I feel the world and how much the world feels me. And so people want to give you more money. People trust you more. Romantic partners trust you more. People want to know what you're doing. People want to know what you're experiencing. And I have friends who are not teachers, who are not, influencers or voices in this, and I have watched their careers skyrocket as they have just gotten deeper into their bodies and into their connection to the divine. It's really quite amazing. And so I always talk to men about this in particular because men are always strategizing for success. Like the masculine impulse is to win. I want to win
Yep.
with her. I want to win in the world. I want to win with money. I want to win with influence. I want to win. I want to win. I want to win. And we're always like thinking and plotting how to fucking win. And I've been telling men like the ultimate strategy to win is presence.
Yes.
Presence is a strategy for victory that is very underused, and it's a really powerful, potent thing that you do have control over. You don't have control over so much of, what presents in the world, but you do have control over your nervous system and your presence and your breath and where you place your awareness.
Yes.
And so that is a strategy that I'm constantly trying to get men to remember. Also trying to remember it myself.
Yep.
And it does. I mean, people just feel you different, and you feel
Yes.
them different.
What it evokes for me is the samurai, right? Like the sort of the code of the samurai. Obviously, many people think of samurais in the context of battle, and not to overly romanticize it, but what I love was way more than sort of. It's this notion of feeling into. Obviously, there's a combat aspect, but there's also the calligraphy. There's the tea.
Mm-hmm.
There's the idea of deeply training so that you are so present to the moment. You are listening to the music beyond the music. We live
They
in a
were great
world.
florists too.
Yes,
They-
yeah,
they
exactly.
were
Great
great.
florist.
Yeah.
There's a man I
Yeah.
loved. I talk about this because I think, unfortunately, and you're very familiar. You lived in LA for a long time. There's a lot of what I would call fake shamans out in the world, which makes me very upset. But long and short of it is, there's a man I've sat in an Ipi in Sweat Lodge with. That is his name is Jerry Nelson, and he's Diné. Not far from you in Sedona, I think, but an incredible man. The way I describe him is, it's like imagine you're sitting next to Aretha Franklin on the bus. You'd have no idea unless she started to sing of the mastery that is present. And Jerry, he didn't wear any feathers. There was no adornments. Trucker's hat, T-shirt, But the depth of his presence was so profound. And when he would sit in the lodge, it was like, he would share stories, but it wasn't this prescription of like, this is what it was like. He was listening to the words that were being shared. He was listening to the words behind the words. He was listening to the body language. And then he would share such that everyone could warm themselves by the fire of the presence. That wasn't even necessarily about him, but it was so profound. And you know it when you're in the presence of it, so to speak. But do you have I don't want to say a codified notion, but for those like, wow, like I know it when I feel it, but I don't necessarily know how to get there. Do you have, you talk, for example, about the pillars of sacred intimacy, which I'd love to talk about in a bit, but do you have pillars of presence? Like, do you have context around, like, for those listening, like, man, I know it, but like, I forget how to get there, or like, how do I train myself in presence? Like, what are your sort of pillars of presence, if you will?
Yeah. Well, I would call, there's kind of a 5-step, I think it's 5 or 6-step process. And I make the distinction between being present, which we could think about in an Eckhart Tolle sort of way, like having a mind awareness of this present moment, right? Which we could do by listening to the sounds of the moment, by really feeling the presence of the moment, and by not being in thought, right? That's an Eckhart Tolle. That's being present to the moment, right? Being experiencing the moment. That's different from what I would call embodying presence. So being present, I would call it one aspect of it, but to embody presence is to literally take the present moment and make it real through your body. That's what embodiment is, to take a concept, whether it's presence or fierce love or devotion or king. I mean, it's limitless, right? and you make it real through your body. It's a shamanic practice of shape shifting, really, and incarnating in an energy that you consciously choose. So embodied presence is I'm going to make my body an instrument of this present moment. So the way that I would teach men to do that is to first ground, first feel down into the earth, like press your feet into the earth, press your spine into the earth, and make a connection to the earth. Then begin that breath practice that we just did, where you start to breathe deeper into your lower abdomen, right? And so now you're grounded and your breath is expanded. Then feel your heart, which is like make a very deep connection to the physical, energetic space of your heart, really feeling the depth of your heart. Then feel the deepest part of you, like the part of you that has no beginning and no end, right? Then feel out, feel the space. So it's this 5-part practice. I outlined it in the book. You ground yourself, you deepen your breath, you connect to your heart, you feel into the deep, unchanging nature, the core of you, and then you feel out into the space. And when you do that, you are now literally making your body a transmission of presence versus just sort of making your mind aware of the present moment. I hope that makes sense. It's a little esoteric, but I think, for the most of your people will get what I'm saying.
I think so. It feels almost like, perhaps this is an improper analogy. I think it's inadequate, but almost like becoming a tuning fork. Like you're both an agent of bringing tune, but you're also a receiver of frequency,
Yeah.
and deeply aware. I think that's the piece, and I love that you talk about this in the context of what men need. And you and I talked a little bit about Yosemite, but I remember very much being in Yosemite. And instead of hiking all the time, when I take moments where I am in that deep, I'm sitting here for 30 minutes, I have no agenda, I'm not looking at anything. And I remember it was actually at Yosemite when I noticed like the environment became, as an input into the environment, it became attuned to me and I became attuned to it, right? The birds started to sing differently. Probably the most poignant example of this was being in Patagonia, and I rode with 2 gauchos and released 50 horses to pasture, and it was my vision, my dream, and I sat for about an hour, and slowly the horses started to envelop me. They welcomed me. At first, they were kind of standoffish, but as I made myself part of the environment and attuned myself, they sort of enveloped me and surrounded me. It was the loudest silence I've ever heard. I couldn't hear a thing. There wasn't a person for miles. And I was surrounded by these horses, and I just started to cry. It was just like I just started bawling. But that's what it's evoked for me. And when you talk about that, is those moments of like really entering into the more of the moment and the environment around you.
Yeah, well, you become resonant, like a very deep, deep, deep resonance. You were very resonant in that moment with those animals, right?
Yes.
And so we become resonant transmissions of consciousness, grounded. I would call it the grounded expanse of consciousness, and which not only relaxes our nervous system, but literally, if you're in a relational moment, it relaxes their nervous system. So if we were just going to tick this up from a resonant moment to a sexually polarized moment, what we would do is we would then begin to feel our feminine partners. I'm talking about the masculine practice here. So we would start to feel our feminine partners. We would actually we would penetrate them with that gift of conscious, expansive presence. And I can tell you from watching this in workshop after workshop after workshop for 15 years that they literally feel a very deep sense of being, penetrated can be a charged word, but I'm talking about energetic penetration of consciousness, right? They feel loved, felt, seen in a very, very profound way, and it immediately creates this sort of polarized sexual experience. So we can both cultivate these capacities right? These are like skills, like learning to play
Yes.
piano, learning to play guitar. These are skills. We can cultivate them and practice them, and then either be resonant in a moment. Like you could be sitting on a rock, above Nevada Falls,
Hmm.
playing guitar and just, expressing resonant beauty with the moment, right? Or you could be looking into a partner's eyes, playing guitar and transmitting into her the deepest part of your heart, right? As a gift. So these kind of gifts, can be utilized to deepen love, to deepen the connection that we're talking about. And that's why practice, I'm constantly harping on people to actually not just read the book, but actually, do the practices in the book. Like, go to my YouTube page and do practices, go to my virtual workshop and take the practices and do those, because it's not, you can't play a beautiful guitar unless you practice guitar.
That's right.
So,
Yeah, and I know we're drawing to a close. I want to reiterate kind of that the book is absolutely incredible. I can't remember the last book I've read 3 times in 3 months. So definitely recommend people listen. You,
thank you.
I personally listen, but read, listen, get the book.
Yeah.
In terms of, I just wanted to, as we draw to a close in the next several minutes, you talk in the book about the 3 pillars of sacred intimacy. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that will be interested, and I know you do a lot of work in sexuality and polarity, and obviously maybe a conversation for another time to go into the fullness of
Sure.
it. But
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about those pillars of sacred intimacy?
Yeah. So you think of these pillars as holding up a temple, right? And if one of the pillars is cracked or shorter than the other or crumbling, the sacred temple that is your love will be weakened, right? And almost always what I see when I work with couples is that one of these pillars is in that state, right? So the first pillar of sacred intimacy is actually the practice of intimacy, to become resonant with each other, to recognize each other's both humanity, sameness, heart. I have a heart, you have a heart. I get afraid, you get afraid. I have desire, you have desire. I'm scared sometimes, you're scared. I mean, just to recognize our humanness, but also to recognize the divine nature of each other. That oneness that is at the heart. We are all divine beings, expressing God as self through, we're all that. So intimacy are the practices of recognizing sameness. And they could be everything from vulnerable communication, intimate communication, to eye gazing and breathe and resonant breathing. But they create a sameness, right? A humanness. The second pillar is devotion. And devotion means that we are especially devoted to, kind of like my example with Madeline yesterday in the car, where I talked about, like, I could feel she was tense, right? And I didn't necessarily want to hear about her resentment, but I knew one was there, and luckily I try to practice what I preach. I'm devoted to her nervous system, to down-regulating her nervous system, to giving clarity, right? And so this is where the rubber meets the road with a lot of people, is to be devotional to another's nervous system more than yours in the moment requires a deep generosity, a deep devotion to love, right? And it will often mean you're not getting your way, you're not getting to be right, you're not getting your pillow fluffed in the exact. There's a real selflessness to it. There's an altruism to it. There's a devotion to making sure that they are not in fight or flight, but rather they are grounded and calm and safe in the moment, right? So that takes something. And there's a
Oh yeah.
whole, I mean, I'm writing a whole second book on these pillars, right? That takes something. And there's a bunch of practices for that. And then the third pillar is what we've been talking about today, which is the arc of sexual polarity that happens, when we are properly in the sexual yoga of recognizing our feminine and masculine poles, and then artfully turning those up and playing with that. And when you have all three of those pillars, well fed and well held, the relationship, the magic in the relationship is just spectacular. And and I've seen it now in enough couples, right? And but again, it takes there are three different skill sets that each take a tremendous amount of work to cultivate. But when you do, it's pretty spectacular.
Wow. So profound. Definitely want to delve deeper. I can't wait to read the second book. For those, this is a little closing out, because I think there's definitely those who are in partnership that will find that presence valuable, and that notion of those three pillars. As someone, and this is, we don't have time necessarily to go into all of this, but one of the things that I admire about you is it occurs to me that you are continually committed to that process of presence, and in that process open to what is evoked, what wants to live. And I guess one of my questions is, in the context of those listening, like myself, to speak a little selfishly, who are looking to call forward, right? And recognize, I had a dear friend of mine, and this is not necessarily that profound, but, they say, oh, you want to call forward your ideal partner, write down all their qualities, and then go off and be those things, right? Instead of just saying, okay, I got to look for that outside myself, how can we be those things? But in the context of those who are looking to both embody that aspect of the masculine or feminine, depending on where you're what you identify with, where you're listening. For me, the masculine, but call in a divine feminine counterpart. Do you have any insights around that bird song, so to speak? If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love your friend's suggestion. I think that's beautiful. And I would add, also make a list of the opposite traits. Right. So if you want, think about it, because we're talking about polarity, right? And so if you want, let's say you want someone who's highly energetic, right? You want a feminine partner that's highly energetic. You're going to be able to have to cultivate deep stillness. Right. And so in some instances, yeah, of course, we want someone who's devotional, right? But what devotional means to a masculine identified human and what devotional means to a feminine identified human is often different. So it's important that we think about, if we want to, so depending on what you want, you may want to attract someone who's just like you, not super polarized, relationship, but just, that's a different thing. But if you are a masculine identified being and you want to attract a deeply feminized being, then deepening in your masculine attributes, right? Learning to deepen in a moment, learning to ground, learning to be able to lead your own nervous system, learning to shepherd your own feminine. I write about this extensively in the book, but learning the attributes it's called currencies, the currencies of the masculine, and building your kingdom. Building your kingdom and both internally and externally. And that's what I would say, let them appear. Build your kingdom internally and externally, and then when they appear, boldly, I'm speaking a lot to men too, but boldly ask, wow, you, I want to get to know you. That's my dating advice for a lot of men. Skip the apps, build your fucking kingdom internally and externally, and when you see her in front of you, don't hesitate.
Yes.
And for women, it's a very similar thing. If you want a king, build your queendom, right? But also become the attributes that a very masculine man would value deeply, would want to dedicate his entire life to in devotion, right? Openness, the capacity to feel, the capacity to bring intuitive wisdom, the capacity to bring magic through the body. You know what I mean? Like, all of those things can be cultivated as a feminine partner. And when we become the traits that the opposite values, we just naturally become more valuable, more attractive. It's not rocket science, and it's not really physical. It doesn't have to be physical. You can be an incredibly radiant being and, not be the typical physical, supermodel, right? You can be incredibly, like the guy you were just talking about, a deeply present man,
Yes.
and not be the typical physical version of that, right?
Right.
So, these are highly, workable skills that any human can start to deepen in. And so that would be my dating advice to close it out. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. John, where can people find you and your work?
Yeah, johnwineland.com. But I want to make a special pitch. I've spent the last 8 years creating it's a virtual workshop. It's a subscription. We have about 500 people from all around the world. I do group coaching calls. I have hundreds of hours of practice on that, and you can get on it for free. It's pretty cheap, right? It's an easy way to get into the content. And so the John Wineland virtual workshop, streaming workshop, there's 1,000 hours of workshop content. I film every workshop I do, and so there's tons and tons of more content. But there's also hundreds of practices that we've clipped from workshops. And it's just a push and play thing where you can literally get into the work right away. 30 something breath practices. I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of it. It's got amazing content on there and amazing practices. And so if people resonate with this and they just want to try more, the virtual workshop is a great place to start.
Beautiful. John, and that's at johnwineland.com.
Yeah, johnwineland.com/streaming. But if they just do John Wineland Virtual Workshop or they go to my website, they'll see a page for it. Yeah.
Beautiful. John, I want to acknowledge your commitment to the more that wants to live in the masculine and the feminine. And I greatly appreciate your work and your insights.
Thank you, man. It's been a nice conversation. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Pause. Final question. You got to jump, but I have one selfish question, which I didn't feel like it was appropriate for the podcast.
Can you give me 1 second?
Yeah,
we're off recording. Okay, let me just pee real quick, and I'll be right back.
You do your thing.